You're listening to the College is Worth It podcast. Learn from leaders who are transforming higher education to ensure that a college degree will pay off for this generation and the next by exploring innovations in education with us in each episode. And now your host, V. Nguyen.
Hello, everyone. This is V, and you're listening to the College is Worth It podcast. Today, Jonathan Shores, who has had a long career in higher education enrollment and is currently the Senior Vice President of Client Services at Ardeo Education Solutions, will be interviewing Dr. Evan Duff, the President of North Carolina Wesleyan University. Dr. Duff has served in multiple positions at the university before becoming president, so he offers a unique perspective and a few stories about the higher ed landscape from his perspectives. So let's get to it.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Shores, Senior Vice President of Client Service here at Ardeo, and I am very excited today to have with me President of North Carolina Wesleyan University, Dr. Evan Duff. Dr. Duff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we'll just jump right into it. And if we can just start off with, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell the listeners a little bit about North Carolina Wesleyan University?
Sure. So I have been the president here. I always count my interim experience in that. So since 2019, so this is my third summer in that role. I've been with the actual university for this is going on my 12th year and served in a couple of different capacities before becoming president. And North Carolina Wesleyan University is in a nutshell, we are a church affiliated with the United Methodist Church, small liberal arts school that offers professional programs for both traditional and adult students. And our main focus here, we focus in on three kind of words or phrases: and personal, practical, and purpose-driven. And so would be more than happy to explain each of those a little further as we get into some additional questions. But in a nutshell, that's who North Carolina Wesleyan University is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I probably should have started with the fact that you and I have known each other, I guess, for going on 20 years now. For all the listeners out there, I had worked in higher ed for a few years on the admission side, enrollment side, and thought that at least in the interim that I wanted to get into the faculty side, and Dr. Duff was the first one to give me a go on the faculty side, and that was almost 20 years ago now. It's hard to believe it's been that long, isn't it?
Absolutely. It flies by when you're doing something you're passionate about.
Absolutely. So I guess with that, I shared a little bit about myself, but tell us a little bit about your kind of personal higher education story. How was your college experience? I know yours was a little bit different than a lot of maybe other college presidents may have, and how did that kind of impact your career trajectory, if you will?
Absolutely. So I share the story oftentimes with new students here on campus. And, when I was graduating high school, the thought of becoming a university president was not even on my radar at all. I really was primarily an introvert. Thought I was going to go into the sciences and work in a lab and study viruses, which would have been very helpful the last couple of years. But that did not, that was not in the cards for me. And so going through the process, I did start at a more traditional institution, NCWU, and through life, got married very young and realized that I couldn't be a traditional student. And so I was lucky enough to find a program that allowed me to go to school on the weekends and be more of a non-traditional student. So my entire higher ed experience from a student perspective from that point on was really non-traditional. So I finished my undergrad going to school on the weekends, went to a graduate program that was on the weekends and spent every other weekend going to class. And then my doctoral program was primarily online with a few residencies, but primarily online. So So I really understand education from that viewpoint. That was my experience. And so I tell students that I changed going from UNCW to the private institution that I attended. I changed my major a couple of times. I worked at a hospital, realized I hated it, which led me away from the sciences and into business. And attained my bachelor's degree, started working in what I call business and industry. So I was working for a credit union, and then later went to more of an operations kind of environment. And it was at that point where I hit a crossroads, and I knew that I did not want to do what I was doing for the rest of my life, and really did some self-examination, reflection, and came up with 3 areas that I thought I would be interested in, and higher education was one of them. And at that time, it was very difficult to get into higher education unless you had higher education experience, but no one was willing to give you higher education experience.
Yeah.
So after about a year or so of applying, I finally got an opportunity for an interview, and luckily landed that position with a community college. And it was also at this time that I knew that if I wanted to stay in higher education, I needed to further my education beyond a master's degree. So again, working full-time, going to class full-time, and then that position led to a position working at my first 4-year private institution, and was promoted once there, and then was fortunate enough after about 5 years being there to be given an opportunity to be vice president with Wesleyan. And so I've been here again 12 years. And again, probably that first vice president's role was when I thought, okay, I'll be in this role for 10 years and then I'll potentially look at presidencies. But I really weighed the pros and cons, not even really knowing what a president, what the demand is for a president. And there were many times where I was like, no, I'll just stay a vice president. There's less pressure there. I'm good at what I'm doing. So, even up until the moment that I got the call, I don't think I had a perfect plan at that point as to when that may happen. So the opportunity came up, I stepped into it, and here I am.
It blows my mind for you to say less pressure at the vice president level, right? Having previously served at the vice president level, I completely takes out of the equation the thought of a president position for me ever, right? Because if there's more pressure there, which naturally there would be, that completely scares me off from that. So kudos to you for stepping into that bigger role and excelling. So circling back a little bit on what you said before, you mentioned that you went to UNC Wilmington early on, and life circumstances kind of moved you in a different direction. As you were choosing that first institution, right, UNCW, obviously a public institution, did cost either at the front end when you were going as a traditional student, or you changed to the non-traditional student, did cost or like a thought process of a return on an investment ever factor into your decision in terms of choosing the college that you were going to go to?
So I would say in the very beginning at UNCW, at that point in that age, I had no clue about cost. Is something more affordable? Can you get a better product from a higher education standpoint? I mean, I knew UNCW was part of the UNC system. I assumed that the quality was there. I really didn't, and even my parents, it was, go to college, and I was the youngest of 4. All my sisters went to college, and it just wasn't something that I guess we thought about. We knew there were federal loans. We knew there were ways to pay for it. It was more about how do we pay for it, not actually what it cost. And then as I changed and went more towards a private institution, that was more about the opportunity to finish my education in a mode or pedagogical way that benefited my circumstance. And at the time, there were very few colleges that catered to working adults. So that, again, that it was less about cost because there were not many options. And so it was either do this at this cost or don't do it. It wasn't until I probably pursued my first graduate degree, my master's degree, when I did look at cost. Again, because of the mode of delivery and the lack of opportunities, it was difficult to really have other apples to compare it to. But it is something that I did at least take pause on and say, okay, the amount of loans I'm going to have, and will I have a return on investment? But I knew, because of my particular career path, this is going to be different for everyone in this process that they're making this decision. For my career path, there is no option to be successful if you don't have that highest degree. So even though I knew it was expensive, even though I knew I'd have a considerable amount of debt when I finished, the only way to attain where I wanted to go was to get it. And so my direction and my path is going to be very different from maybe those that are looking at education today, unless they want to go into higher education. But even if you're not a professor, or unless you're a professor, really, the market is so different now. And even what was expected of university presidents before is not expected of university presidents in many cases now. So the world is evolving, and how you go about preparing yourself for whatever that end goal is could be very different.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked a little bit about your career path, right? And we kind of glossed over or ran quickly by the roles that you've done there at Wesleyan and other institutions. What can you tell us about your career path, how it kind of led to North Carolina Wesleyan University? Obviously, you've held multiple leadership roles, right? You mentioned vice president there at North Carolina Wesleyan, but you've held a couple different vice presidency roles there at the college, and even previously, right, as a director and a dean. Can you kind of walk us through how those roles have informed you as a president and shaped you into preparing you to be a president here for these last almost 3 years?
Absolutely. So, and I'll give a quick rundown of those higher ed opportunities and then kind of relate to how they all kind of shaped and molded me. So as I stated earlier, I did get my start at a community college here in North Carolina. And my official title was an occupational extension coordinator. And so, what does that mean? And essentially what it meant is my responsibility was to set up continuing ed types of classes for people who wanted to enhance their skill set, get into a particular career. And that could have been anything from masonry and electrical certifications to insurance agents who needed to do continuing education every year to keep their license. So it was an array of types of classes that I oversaw. But the great thing about that program and that position was I was also allowed the freedom to create new programs if there was a need for them. So the community college system had this huge Rolodex of all these classes, and I would go through them and say, what could bring interest to this area? What are some needs that the community has? So that really allowed me to be entrepreneurial from that standpoint. I then, after 3 years, had the opportunity to go work at my alma mater, where I ended up with where I got my bachelor's degree from, and was a director of a satellite location that primarily, it did only assist working adult students. So they would attend class at night. And I got to see in the very beginning what it was like to start a location from the construction phase all the way to, the 600 students we grew to in about 2 years, and just kind of seeing that growth and development from day one and really being in charge of that. So again, that allowed me to be creative, build teamwork skills, help to lead other people, and just kind of, I viewed it as, this is my business and I need it to be successful. There was no safety net of a VP in the building or a president in the building, I was the director of a satellite location and there was no one else in that building to oversee my actions. And this was at the age of 27. So what 27-year-old today, gets that luxury sometimes. So that really honed a lot of my leadership skills. And then was there 5 years, had been promoted to dean. So I got to oversee the other satellite locations for the adult studies program there. And again, just taking what I had learned as a site director to the next level and help to mold and build teams with other site directors so that they were successful. And then wasn't looking for a job, and a headhunter had, like they do for all of us in higher education, you get an email that says, hey, if you're interested in this, reach out to us. But it's kind of like they're sending out a fishing net and they're just kind of seeing what kind of fish they get. And I had no interest. I shared it with my wife and she was like, you should apply. And I was like, I don't think I'm ready. I don't know that I'm prepared for this. And it was really almost at the end of the process where they were no longer accepting applications. And I just reached out to ask questions. And through working with the firm, they got me to submit my resume. And over weeks of conversing with them and then having 2 interviews, I was offered the job here as Vice President of Adult Studies. So they were looking for me to take all of the skills that I had built with non-traditional students at 2 other institutions and really take their adult program to the next level. And so I was able to come in and again, through being allowed to be an entrepreneur and just kind of running with it, grew the program. We ended up with going from 3 to 11 satellite locations, primarily partnering with community colleges, which was the key, because we wanted to be a partner with the community colleges and not be competition for them. And it was successful, and it was successful up until 2017. And if you look at most of the national trends with data on adult higher education, some of that started to go down in 2012, but we continued to do well. But in 2017, it caught up with us like it caught up with everyone else in the world. And you saw a decrease at the community colleges, which is something we had not seen in a decade. So the trend caught up with us, and we're adjusting, and of course the pandemic, but did well in that, and was asked to be interim provost twice, and then became the provost because the organization found value in what I was doing. And that's what my advice to anyone is to ask, continually to ask, what value are you bringing to your institution, and make adjustments as needed. So again, had a great work ethic, had a great group of people. And then the opportunity came up very suddenly to be president, and was asked by the board to do that. And 3 years later, they still like me enough, so I'm still president.
Well, here's a question for you. You mentioned you became a director at 27. It sounds like that experience was essentially almost like a campus president, right? You were running the ship, so to speak, and you were in charge of that. If you could look back, and the today Evan Duff could look back to that Evan Duff and give him any piece of advice, what might that be? Like what might you say to yourself 20 years ago that you wish you would have known then that you know now?
Wow, that's always a tough question, because I feel like, and this is I hope the listeners don't think this is not I am a humble person. This is not me bragging by any means.
Yeah.
But
I can attest to that.
But to become a college president at 41, it's hard to really look back and say, wow, what would I have done differently? Because maybe the outcome would not have been as good. But I would say, and this is my but again, I would give this advice to anyone, is try to forecast where you do want to go with your life career, and try to get as much of the learning experiences as you need to be successful. Rather that is a short-term course, rather that is a full-on degree, whether that's a certification. There are probably a couple of things I would have done differently. There was a program I remember when I was at the community college that I wanted to do, and it was a certification on career development. Fast forward to last summer, as president, I took the course and became certified. And I remember a mentor reaching out to me and saying, why are you wasting your time doing this? How is this going to help you as president? But it's something that I always wanted to do. And it gives me perspective when I'm talking to 18 and 19-year-olds about career development. And, my advice is actually sound based on my certification. So I would probably have told myself to explore those alternative learning opportunities, because I did the traditional learning opportunities. I would have explored some of the shorter term certification type learning, just to add more knowledge and skills. Yeah,
that's great. It's interesting to have known you for these 20 years, right? And to have seen, I even would say almost like the steadfastness, right? I mean, you've always been methodical in my opinion, to the process, right? And the process is going to work out. You got to work the process and trust that those experiences. And I know you and I have had a lot of conversations offline as we've just chatted and being friends over the years, and experiences seem to be the thing that always resonate with us, right? The experiences that we've had, and more importantly, what we've learned from those experiences and how they shaped, I think, especially who you are today, and being a college president so young. So kind of segueing to that, we mentioned it a couple times today. Some folks may not have caught on, but North Carolina Wesleyan has recently gone through a name change from North Carolina Wesleyan College to North Carolina Wesleyan University now. Walk us through what those implications are like. I've personally never been through a change from a college to a university. The institutions that I've worked at, that either happened afterwards or well before I was there. So what implications does that have for North Carolina Wesleyan? And maybe talk through how excited you are about that.
Sure. Yeah.
Hopefully you're excited about that.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting time on campus. How people defined a college versus a university 20 years ago is just those hard and fast rules are no longer the case. And so, as an example, yes, we are a university now, but we are still a teaching focused institution. We are still about one-on-one mentoring opportunities. While we provide research opportunities for our students, we view research very differently than what maybe a Research One institution university would view that as. So, we still have the mindset of a small church affiliated liberal arts institution that does focus on professional programs as well. I think the things that we were thinking about as we talked about internally about what does university mean, we looked at areas like, we do serve a non-traditional population, and a rather large non-traditional population, and we've done that for 40 years. We serve a large population of international students. 15% of our traditional student base are internationals. We are doing some of the things that maybe smaller universities have done, and that's why they characterize themselves as a university. So, that was some of the thought process into it. Another piece of it was, living into what a university is. So I don't think it's a situation where you flip a switch and everything is magically different. It is certainly an opportunity for us to grow in, we have a couple of graduate programs, but we have 2 more that are potentially going to be reviewed by faculty this fall. We have other kind of synergies and partnerships happening that kind of leans into that university setting. So I think there's much more to come. And it's almost like the chicken or the egg. You got to make something happen one way in order to create the catalyst for other things. And so we think that this is one of our moments to be a catalyst. And so it has been amazing to see, like, you always prepare yourself, and I certainly prepare myself as a president for worst case scenarios. And so I'm waiting for, alumni from the 70s to get on social media and just be upset about it. I'm waiting for people in the community to say this is ridiculous. But we've seen the opposite. We've not seen, and I hate to say this because maybe I need to knock on wood or something, but we've not had one negative comment on social media. We have had events on campus where we've had those alumni from the 70s and early 80s, and they are clapping when we announce our name. People are really energetic about it and embracing it, and how can they be a part of it? We had an alum step up, and this was an alum, I think, from the late 70s, who knew we were changing our letters on our brick wall. So these are our metal letters, wanted to pay for it. I mean, wanted to be the one who paid for the new university letters. I mean, you don't anticipate those types of things happening when you're really thinking about why you're doing this. But that is the wonderful fruit that comes from these types of changes. And it's been amazing to see.
Yeah, I imagine you use that word catalyst. I imagine, it really is for everybody on campus. There's kind of a renewedness, a vigor of everybody being a part of the larger community again. Not that ever subsided, right? But it's now there. It's ever present, right? It's in front of them, and I bet that's exciting for a lot of folks on campus, especially all the stakeholders, but the students included.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of positive energy happening.
Yeah, that's great. So we'll kind of shift gears a little bit now. We're talking still about the college experience. We often see how people will question the value of college, right? And I used to always say for years, it seemed like every election cycle, right? Or at least, presidential election cycle. So every 4 years, the value or the cost of college was at least part of the rhetoric that was kind of spun up as talking points. So a couple questions for you in relation to that. As we see people questioning the value and or the cost of college, do you see or hear that at your institution? So again, a private institution, do you see that being a part of the narrative for prospective students, for faculty, for really everybody on campus?
Yeah, I think anyone who says that it's not, they're just not being honest. I think students and parents today are more savvy than they've ever been when it comes, or at least more critical than they've ever been when it comes down to what they're spending on higher education. And they really do want to see the value of, how is this going to help my son or daughter? What are they going to accomplish when they graduate from here? How are you going to help them? They really want to see kind of the outcomes. And when institutions, and we have a couple of things that we do here to kind of not only display that value, but to show how we can make it affordable for all families. They need to hear that. They want to know when we include books and tuition, that is an important factor to them as they're evaluating where their son or daughter goes to college. Those types of things are not necessarily always on the 18, 19, 20-year-old's mind. Even though some of them do pay for it themselves, a lot of them are not because I didn't, and I don't, it
Right.
takes a very mature high school graduate to kind of be thinking about that. But we've had students come through here that their parents have said, if you figure out how to pay for it, you can go to college. And then we have others that the parent will write the check and the student has no clue what anything costs. But whether it's the parent or the student or both, that's absolutely a conversation that's being had on campus, having to show the value and the affordability. And what is interesting is a lot of times people will hear about a private institution, and just because it's private, they automatically think it's out of their price range. And I hate to think of it like that, but that's what it is. And in reality, and speaking just for Wesleyan, we have so many things in place that leverage the cost. And I was just doing this because my niece goes to a state institution here in North Carolina. And I was just doing the cost comparison, and we are as affordable as that state institution she's going to because of the way we package and some of the things that we do to help our students. So it's rare that any student comes here and pays, the price they see on the website. And there's many reasons for that. But yeah, it's definitely a conversation, and colleges have got to do a better job of explaining the value and the affordability.
So along those lines, how do you think colleges should be thinking about the ROI that they talk about to these prospective graduates, right? And maybe even how that relates to the value proposition that they're giving to these students and their families. Because to your point, right, as a 17, 18, maybe 19-year-old coming out of high school, my thought, one, aligning back to what you said, never thought I was going to be in higher ed, didn't even really know that that was a job option, right? But I also never thought, oh, well, what are the outcomes, right? That was never a question for me to think about. What are the outcomes? How much am I going to make after graduation? I mean, I just thought that every college graduate made a lot of money. And then I went to work in higher education and realized that's not the case, right? But, to that value proposition question, how do you, I guess I'm going around the corner here, but is the conversation more towards the parents for traditional students versus just the directly to the student, or,
You have to do both.
Let me pause there. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to do both. So with parents, and sometimes colleges are smart about this in that a lot of times in open houses or orientations, they'll separate the two groups at some point. And I think that's probably the best way to do it. But parents need the data points. They need to know, bottom line, what is this going to cost? How are you going to help it to be affordable to my situation? What are opportunities for, my son or daughter to leverage this cost? And, oh, by the way, how are you going to help them to be a success once they leave? We don't want them to leave with this mountain of debt and no prospects of where they can go and what they can do. So colleges have to really show parents through hard data that they collect, so not just national trends and national data, but they need to know where their alumni are, what they're doing. There are many organizations that will kind of do their own external analysis, and they'll tell colleges, you're in the top 10 of ROI for your state. And so, and they'll give you the formula, and that's not perfect, but it does give it gives you the opportunity to say an outside party that we did not pay for said this about our institution. And so being able to share those types of things with parents. So you need to provide them with all of those things, and share the success stories with them. Share with them where your graduates have gone on to be successful. And the more you have of those, the better. More and more colleges are showing, 98% of our graduates attained a job or went to grad school within the first 6 months. Or X percentage of students were prepared for their first job based on the surveys they've done with their students. So that's important to the parents. With the students, it's more about helping them understand how the experience they will have will transform who they are. and prepare them for life. So it's less about, they're at that moment not necessarily thinking about, okay, when I get out of here, I'm going to have this much in loans. This will be my payment. This is how much I need to make. They're not thinking about that at that point. So share with them, how by being a part of this student organization and with this faculty working with you one-on-one and with these things happening, you're going to get a job shadowing experience in your freshman summer year that will prepare you for XYZ career path. And sometimes it's letting you know what you don't want to do. So that was my experience. My job shadowing experiences told me what I didn't want to do, which is just as valuable. And so for them, it's more about what they now you're going to have a percentage that want to know about the parties and the, what kind of fun we can have. And that's certainly a piece of college. But once they're here, you're then transforming them in that process. And you certainly don't want to sell them on, hey, this is Disneyland, you're going to have an awesome experience. They do need to know up front that this is serious, it is expensive, and they need to be prepared for whatever outcomes they're looking for. So I do think you sell it a little bit differently, but at the same time, those parents and those parents those students and those parents are going back and having conversations, and they'll be able to relate the information, back to the full household to make a decision.
Yeah, no, that's great there. I mean, there's a lot of things that are running around in my head when you answered that, and because of your answer, I think back to my experience as a traditional student in college, and I think back to, what did I get out of that? And it wasn't necessarily highlighting any book. It wasn't, memorizing anything from any business class that I had, but it was the interaction that I had with faculty members. It was the interaction that I had with fellow classmates. It was the fact that the faculty pushed me to think critically, right? They pushed me to think outside the box. It wasn't, I can't remember anything I highlighted in any book in college ever, right? But I can think lessons that I learned from so many faculty members about their experiences and things that I could take from their experiences. And I think that's spot on. The other thing that kind of resonates with me is we think about higher ed in general, and we think about the ROI value. And the one thing that makes me giggle is I can remember you and I having conversations about this, I guess it was 10, maybe 15 years ago, when MOOCs were coming out, right? And these massively open online classes, and how a lot of pundits said, this is the end of higher ed, right? We're all moving to these MOOCs. They're free or very low cost. Employers aren't as concerned about a degree per se as much as they are the certification, the fact that you've got that. And I would agree with that. In some situations, it is about the certifications. It is about the degree, not about the degree you have, but maybe the experience. But there's something that comes that you take away from you, whether you're a traditional student or a non-traditional student, by having set in that classroom setting, whether it's online or face-to-face, that I feel can't quite be replicated as it could in a MOOC. And it's funny, you fast forward 15 years, what we thought was going to take over traditional higher ed, you really don't hear much about them anymore. And I don't know if that just shows higher ed's stubbornness, or maybe it just shows the resiliency of higher ed. I'm not sure which. Somebody will write a book on that though. So okay, so final question, and then we'll let you off the hook here. In your opinion, Dr. Duff, is college still worth it?
So I'm going to answer that by kind of taking us back to those three words I used very early in the interview. And so, and yes, I am talking about this from Wesleyan's very specific point of view, but I do think this also globally answers that question. So we do look at things, our new brand, our new identity is personal, practical, and purpose-driven. And the personal piece of that is, we want students to feel like they belong, they feel welcomed, and that they connect. So they connect with their peers, they connect with faculty members, and it's those connections that will help to, accelerate the things that they do here and what they're able to accomplish when they graduate. The practical, we really want students, and this goes into the question of do I think higher education is worth it? We want students that are in those entry-level classes, regardless of their major. So say they're a business major or criminal justice major, but they're in that fine arts class or they're in that literature class, and they're like, who cares about this? Why do I need this? We want to make sure that everything a student does, they know how it correlates to their life, both personal and professional. And so I think about when I was in my music appreciation class as a 18-year-old, and I'm like, oh, this is the most boring class ever. But I cannot tell you how many times, whether I'm listening to a song, I'm thinking and analyzing it from the perspective that I learned in that music appreciation class. So it helped me to analyze, to be a critical thinker. It led me to skill sets that have nothing to do with music per se, but then it had everything to do with that music appreciation class. And so we want our students that everything is intentional and everything that they're learning, it is providing them with a set of skills that they may not even realize they're getting, that they will then use in their personal and professional life. And then the purpose-driven is really about finding their purpose, and whether that is finding out what they absolutely don't want to do to finding out what they love doing. And that's through a series of different activities and events they would have on campus. But to answer the question, I think it absolutely, now, this doesn't mean that college is for everybody. So I'm not saying that college is for everyone and everyone must go to college. But what I am saying is that depending on the things you want to accomplish in life, higher education sets you up to be successful because you are learning things that are helping to develop your mind, helping to get you to think about things differently, to help you to be a critical thinker, to communicate with others. So again, can you have a person that goes to a trade certification program and that's all they want to do and they thrive in that? Sure, and that person can be successful and they're not missing out on anything. But if that same person wants to own their own business that then does work globally, it'll be very difficult for that person to make that transition without some more structured knowledge that you typically would get from a 4-year education. And so again, I would never say that college is for everyone, but is there a place for it, and is it important, and is it still necessary in so many ways? Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know how we could wrap up any better on that. So with that, I will thank you for your time. Always great to have a conversation with you. Always great to talk personal. Always great to talk professional as well. And every time we have a conversation, I feel like I walk away knowing a little bit more about your heart, your passion, and a little bit more about just life in general. So thank you for your time, Dr. Duff. Greatly appreciate you. And just thank you.
Appreciate it. Appreciate the time. And thank you for being a part of my journey. You're a great friend, and I appreciate it.
This podcast is brought to you by Ardeo Education Solutions. Ardeo Education Solutions provides loan repayment assistance programs, known as LRAPs, to increase access and enrollment at higher ed institutions. Ardeo's LRAPs help graduates with modest incomes repay their federal student, Parent Plus, and private alternative loans. The powerful promise they provide gives students the confidence they need to enroll. To learn more about Ardeo, visit us on the web at ardeo.org.